Hey everyone, welcome back to Making the Game from Concept to Kickstarter. I'm your host Reece, head developer of the game Bloodthrone, and welcome back. Sorry we missed last week's episode, but my business partner Frankie got married last weekend. So we were out of town much of the week traveling and didn't have time to record. In this episode, we will be discussing playtesting. David K. asked about the process on our Kickstarter campaign page, and as it is such a big topic, I thought it would warrant an entire episode of its own. Just a fair warning, this is a big topic, so this episode may be longer than normal. However, I will always strive to keep the show to the 30 minutes or less time limit as we go forward. Also, as requested by Walter, Curtis, and Whittington on our campaign pages, we are working on a painted pledge level with a few options. We have a paint studio, the FLG Paint Studio, that can do some very high-level work to really make the minis look amazing. They painted the minis in the example pictures. However, that level of quality is not cheap as it takes a lot of man hours. We were told about the sun drop style of painting, which is essentially a really nice shade added to the models. It's like a really simple way to make the models look more three-dimensional and give them some depth, some shading, and some highlighting. So we're working that out with our partners at CreatureCaster. They have a paint line called Cuttlefish Colors, which will be the official paint line for Bloodthrone going forward. And we're working to formulate something similar to what you've seen with that. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Awakened Realms does it on a lot of their new projects, and just give us a little bit of time so that we can actually get the right formula and then, of course, apply it to some models and then get some nice pictures and put it together in some marketing material to show it off. It shouldn't take too long, but we are actively working on that. Now back to the main topic, playtesting. To me, it's the most fun of the process, so I was really excited to cover this topic. I'm a pretty hardcore gamer myself, and I get obsessed with game mechanics, game lore, etc. when I'm really into a game. So digging into the nuts and bolts of what we hope you all will find to be a fun and innovative system that we have for Bloodthrone was a true joy for me personally. I have dreamed about making a game since I was a young boy, and back gaming with my buddies growing up, I would often make homebrew rules or even entire games for my friends to play back in junior high and high school. For those of you who are non-American listeners, that's roughly 12 to 18 years old. Having talked to my friends in the industry that have made games before, playtesting often can be one of the most challenging parts of the game development process for many. Some of my friends in the industry have told me that they end up doing little to no playtesting, not because they don't want to, but because getting that done can be very challenging from a logistical point of view. For us, fortunately, it was one of the easiest parts of the process because the company that we own, Frontline Gaming, is staffed almost entirely by hardcore gamers. So I was fortunate enough to be at work all day with people that live and breathe gaming. For us, we could even talk about it while we were working, and I know that's not realistic for everybody, but just pointing out that that was one of the benefits of working in the industry. Once I felt the rules were in a place to try out, one of the main playtesters, Pascal, who also painted some of the awesome minis that you've seen in the promotional pictures, was the first to sit down and give it a go with me. I was really happy that he specifically was willing to try it, as he has played like every game. He's also watched what seems to be like every fantasy and sci-fi movie and show that's ever been made. He reads comics, he's an avid artist. So basically he's a walking repertoire of nerd knowledge. So getting his feedback I knew would be really valuable because he had such a wide breadth of knowledge in pop culture and gaming. So he and I would play after work once or twice a week, and we would brainstorm ideas about rules mechanics, lore ideas, etc., and I took tons and tons of notes. We iterated on the process what felt like at least a dozen times, if not more. Bloodthrone started out as an idea of trying to replicate some popular CRPGs or computer role-playing games and strategy games on the tabletop. So some of my all-time favorites are games like the Baldur's Gate series, Icewind Dale, etc., where you have a party of highly customizable heroes that you can iterate on nearly infinitely with different permutations. Another example would be like the Divinity Original Sin game. I'm the kind of gamer that will create dozens of characters or parties in any RPG game. So instead of one max level character on an MMO, I'm the person that has 12 mid-level characters. In wargaming, which is my other gaming passion besides RPGs and board games, I had 13 different armies in 40K, I had 4 or 5 in Age of Sigmar, and I had a file on my computer that had theoretical lists written for like every army in all those games, and they're usually based around a theme, etc. For those of you that are not wargamers, a list basically refers to the roster of your army of miniatures. Likewise, I would have a file on my computer with just tons of different characters for, Pathfinder, D&D, Rifts was another one of my favorites, etc. The reason I say all this is that I and many other people just love the creative endeavor of coming up with a cool concept for a character, party, an army, whatever the case may be, whatever kind of game you're playing. And it's just a really fun, creative exercise. I wanted to combine elements of that with really cool strategy games like XCOM, Heroes of Might and Magic, etc., where you have a larger strategic game to think about of trying to beat the clock, resource management, achieving objectives, etc., in addition to the core of the actual tactical level of the game where you're moving around your party members, your miniatures, your sprite in the computer game, whatever the case may be, and making tactical level decisions and managing your party, leveling them up, customizing them. Basically adding the game portion of the game, if that makes sense, right? So it's not enough to just have the ability to have a sandbox to make cool stuff or to customize existing characters, but you want to have a context or a setting in which to exercise those that's fun and engaging unto itself. Now take all that, sprinkle on a familiar high fantasy RPG setting, give it a dark tone similar to like Dark Souls or something similar to that, and you get the overall picture of what the vision was from the get-go. Now, obviously, doing all that was quite challenging, as a computer can do so much more than a human mind can do. So the iterative process consisted of getting a baseline of rules, trying them, taking notes on what worked and what didn't, tweaking some parts of it, and then trying again, taking more notes, and then repeating the cycle weekly for literally years. The key is to not try and change too much at once, as otherwise you don't have anything to compare your iterations to, and it can end up being apples and oranges between sessions. Each iteration resulted in increasing levels of simplification and streaming. Now that said, as you, the end user, will quickly see when you play Bloodthrone, it's a very dense game. It has tons of mechanics and options, but it started out seriously an order of magnitude more dense, if you can believe that. Well, I suppose you can because you all haven't played it yet. The objective was to strike a balance between as much room for player agency and creativity as possible without making the game so intimidating that it would prove to be a barrier to entry. Lastly, and most importantly, fun would override interesting or complex mechanics, just as a general rule of thumb, right? So if we tried out two versions of a rule and one was like cooler from a mechanics like design perspective, but the other one was just more fun, we would always default to that. So that sort of sets the stage for how we began. And once the game started to become more fleshed out and it was less just like notes and us kind of making it up as we went along, other people at work started to become curious, like, oh, what are these guys doing, man? They keep doing this every week, a couple times a week. So more people became interested and started joining in organically. That's why I think it might behoove you to playtest your game at a game store. Now, I know a lot of gamers are like, oh, but someone might copy my idea. It's highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely. Plus, there's not that much new under the sun, right? Even a game like Bloodthrone, which is combining all these different elements and is hopefully going to create something that feels really new. A lot of the ideas have been in the gaming world for a while, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think it's more valuable to get feedback from different points of view, which I'll talk about more in a bit, than it is to worry about someone like taking your idea. Because if you're playing at a game store and you're having fun and you're being enthusiastic, other people might just ask to join you. My business partner, Frankie, who is an extremely skilled miniatures gamer, and some of the other guys in the company, like one of the main playtesters whose name is Hunter, are really skilled at breaking games. These guys play Magic, 40K, Age of Sigmar, D&D, and other competitive games where they come up with really wacky or creative like deck ideas or army lists or characters, or they just try and straight up power game. And that's exactly what I wanted. Guys like that or girls like that, people like that, they help define rules that are worded poorly, that can be exploited. They find balance issues, and that's perfect. That's what you want. Because the more of that you can get in advance, the less whack-a-mole you'll be playing once the game is out there. Another group of the playtesters, such as the Anu family and one of our painters, Hero, they came in with a different point of view of playing for fun. They have a little bit of a min-maxing instinct, which I think is just normal for gamers. We tend to be math-oriented, but I would not call them power gamers. They provided really valuable insight into what I think represents the point of view of the average gamer. So I really valued their point of view as well, because I think it's easy for people like hardcore gamers to get really, really into like the math and the crunchy mechanics, to lose sight of the fact that probably your average customer is not coming at it from that like obsessive level point of view. So I really valued the insights that they had of coming to the game looking to just enjoy the time that they spent playing it. In between the power gamer and casual gamer ends of the gaming spectrum is where I wanted to land. So each week during playtesting, I would observe how the testers reacted to certain things, take notes on what they liked, what they didn't like, what options they used a lot in the game, which options or rules they forgot to use or just chose not to use. And I kept a very diligent log, which became quite a behemoth over time, but was also an invaluable resource. I go back and check that log all the time when I'm trying to tweak or finalize a rule prior to cementing it and getting it ready for production, the rulebook, or as a card or whatever, because once it goes to the printer, you're basically done. You can't really change it. So in addition to diligently doing your best to catch any grammar or spelling errors or any, technical errors, you want to make sure that the balance and the flavor are correct as much as possible. That's why that log is so valuable, because you're not going to remember things, months later. So it's really important that you sit down and you take all those notes as diligently as possible, as soon after the playtest session, even during, that you can, so that they're fresh in your mind when you write them. For me, I prefer working in a spreadsheet for my log, as it allows me to include lots of different types of data from, numbers, words, pictures, charts, graphs, etc. And funny enough, it took me many iterations of just how to structure this. Like, how do I gather this data in a way that's not only accurate, but it's easy for me to go back later and interpret and read the data and understand what the heck, what was that? Why did I write that down at that time? So it took quite a while to learn how to make the game as we were making the game, which is one of the reasons why the development process took so long. We were building the airplane as we were flying it. And as far as we come, I still feel like I have more to learn by quite a bit than I know now. So it's been a fun process, and I look forward to improving and getting better as we go. The key point, though, I think, in this regard is to be consistent and diligent in keeping notes, to not try and influence what the testers say, or especially to not argue with them, but to simply absorb the information that they're offering you. Now, that said, we did engage in loads of debates after our test games. Sometimes this part was longer than the actual game. But if you want the process to be smooth and sustainable in regards to playtesting, you have to respect the tester's point of view and take their suggestions when they're correct, even if it means killing a mechanic you really like. If you dismiss their input, eventually they're going to bail on you, because you're going to feel like they're wasting their time, and your game will be worse as a result. So basically, just set aside your ego and do your best to absorb the information, let them say what they want to say, observe, because a lot of times what they do is going to be more telling than what they say. And then afterwards, you can engage in a spirited debate, but just be respectful about it. Once the team got good enough with the rules that I could observe and not like join in and teach them as we were playing it, that's when I felt like I got the best data. In that capacity, I could just sit back and watch them play, take notes, answer rules questions that they had on the fly. And now as you're iterating each session, this is a challenge, as the testers won't be into it as you are. You've got it all in your head. They don't. And it's not really realistic for you to expect for them to upload all the new data every single week and be completely on point. So you got to be patient. And one of the things I found that was the best solution to this was to have a quick pregame, like, what's changed, like a change log, so to speak, and just verbally say, hey, from last week, due to the observations that I made and all the wonderful feedback that you all gave me, we changed rule X, Y, and Z. Thank you for that. So we'll play another game, and that's the only thing that's changed, which, again, as I was saying earlier, you don't want to change too much at once, because it gets a little confusing, right? When you're doing minor changes in a repetitive process, I feel like you're going to get a better outcome, and it's going to be a smoother process as well. That said, there will be times when you have to totally junk a mechanic and write a new one. That's a part of the process, but just be really transparent with your testers. Like, hey, you know what? The movement system we were using just totally didn't work. We're not going to use movement points. We're going to use a ruler. Or, we didn't really like squares. We're going to do hexes, which we'll talk about that in another podcast. That's quite the debate. But, occasionally you will have to make big changes, but especially as you get further into the process, you'll be making smaller and smaller tweaks, which makes it easier to measure the effect of the change. A big part of that process is to take the time to explain why a change was made. And in my opinion, the best way to frame it is to say, like, hey, playtester Bob, you were smashing the monsters way too easily, or you you found this really cool trick, which was smart. You know, you're a clever gamer, but it felt like it was a little too strong or it was a little too weak. So thank you for that valuable feedback, but we changed it. So then when you do that, they feel engaged, they feel recognized, like their effort is recognized. And sometimes what I found in playtesting is a player would get really attached to an OP mechanic that they discovered, and you want to say like, hey, you know, I don't want you to feel like you're losing something that you discovered. You know, you want to do it in a way that's not going to make them feel like upset or dejected. You know, you could flip it into a positive, right? Like, hey, thank you. You were doing exactly what I'm asking everybody here to do. You found something that we had to change. And I found in framing it that way, you got the best end result, and it made the playtesters feel like good and useful, which is exactly what they are, and that's exactly the way you want them to feel. One of the challenges I found was in communicating the rules in a clear manner to the testers. For me, I work in kind of like a scattershot manner. I'll be writing a rule or a section of lore for one thing. It'll give me an idea, so I'll go back and change like 3 other things because they're all interrelated. Then I'll switch to writing a prompt for art direction for the art studio. So I'm kind of all over the place, and you want to make sure that you come into the play session ready to go. Like I said, that change log really helps a ton. And when you present the rules initially, it's going to make sense to you, but it might not make sense to the playtesters. So you want to take the time to put it into an easily digestible format that they can understand. As I stated before, I really like to put things into spreadsheets, but sometimes without context, you can look at a spreadsheet and it's just like gobbledygook. It's just like an explosion of information. So another person won't understand the logic that you used to structure the data. So sit down and talk to your playtesters like, hey, this is the way I put all the data into, the rule set in its nascent form. Does this make sense to you? Explain it to them. Ask for feedback. Like, is there any way I can do this in a format that's going to make it easier for you? Perhaps I could just put it into like a 2-page, doc or whatever the case may be, as condensed as possible to give you the information that you need to play. Now, there's only so much preparation you can do. There's going to be a lot of it that's just going to be explaining it at the table. I think that's the way a lot of people learn new games, like board games. Like there's one person in the crew that knows it and kind of like guides everybody else through it, or you look at a YouTube video or something to that effect. So that's going to be a big part of it, but do your due diligence and try to make it as easy as possible for your playtesters to just jump in and do the fun part and not make it feel like a job for them. I'll talk more about other things you can do to streamline things, but that's really probably the most important point of information or advice I can give on this topic is if you want a sustainable group of playtesters that are going to feel appreciated and engaged, is to respect their time. That's really the most important thing that I could say on this topic. So schedule a consistent time to test. Don't ever be late. Don't flake. Choose a location that is convenient for them, not for you. Come prepared and ready to be as efficient as possible so as not to eat up too much of their precious time. Basically, make it as easy as possible for them to consistently show up as they are doing you a favor, not the other way around, right? Again, set your ego aside. Think about it. If I was the person that was being the playtester to help my friend make a game, I'm doing them a favor, and you need to make sure that you keep that in your mind and not look at it as like, oh, this is my great adventure. This is my dream. Everyone else is lucky to be a part of it. That's a toxic attitude that's going to turn away potential playtesters. And one last note, something that I did that I think was really appreciated is every play session, I bought the whole crew food. I wasn't going crazy and buying everybody steak and lobster. It was like burritos from the Mexican joint, or Subway sandwiches or whatever. And it's everybody's budget is different, of course, but it's a gesture that it's relatively small, but it goes a long way, right? It's like you showing them, hey, I value your time, and this is 3-4 hours of everyone's week, once a week. So the least I can do is to feed everybody. Now, obviously, as the playtesters for Frontline Gaming are also getting paid by the company, that helps. And as you get further down the road, and if you build your game into a company, I would totally recommend paying the playtesters because their feedback is invaluable. But when you're just getting started and you possibly don't have a lot of money or resources or whatever, that's like a nice little thing you can do to keep the wheels turning. In the process, be sure to take the time to think about the point of view of each playtester that's coming so that you can categorize their input in a way that is going to be the most useful for you. As I noted earlier in this podcast, are they a power gamer or a competitive gamer? Are they a casual gamer? Are they more into it for the lore? Or are they more into it for the aesthetic? Are they really into rules mechanics and they're more of like an engineering type math brained person? And you want to bring all that feedback in because your customers aren't going to be one type of gamer usually, right? Even in the most like, esoteric game, there's going to be a variety of people that enjoy it. So don't let yourself get pigeonholed into only approaching it from a certain point of view, right? Like, for example, Magic the Gathering, Commander, as I understand it, now we just preface this by saying I am not a Magic the Gathering expert by any stretch of the imagination. But Commander is a more casual way to play the game and it's massive. So if you're a Magic player that's like super into competitive play, you don't want to only focus on that because you will be excluding a potentially huge part of the customer base. Now, to counter my counter, if you want to make a game that's ultra niche, that's ultra just for funsies, like Cards Against Humanity, or something that's hyper technical, then there is room for that, right? And you just want to make sure you position yourself in the marketing phase to clearly communicate what your game is. But if you're going for a more broader appeal, like a Bloodthrone type game, then you want to make sure that you appreciate and understand the point of view of everyone that's coming to test. That will also help smooth out any potential personality conflicts between the playtesters. Sometimes if you have a tester that's one type of gamer and another that's a different type, there can be conflict and like, oh, I don't like your ideas, or you don't know what you're talking about. You want to squash that as quickly as possible. It's going to poison the well. It's going to make people not want to show up if there's a bunch of conflict. And in my experience, the best way to deal with that type of thing is to just very calmly like talk through like, hey, both of you make valid points. I appreciate the input that you all have. We're trying to make a game that appeals to, this bucket of gamers. So the input's valuable. Please be respectful of each other's point of view. And if, obviously if someone's being really disruptive, do the professional thing and very politely and privately just say, hey, I think it would be better if you didn't come back. That said, super appreciate the effort. We'll credit you in the rule book, add you in the playtesters. Contributors, no hard feelings. Now, as it pertains to specific rules, I really want to take the time on this podcast to deep dive into some of the rules topics like movement, resource allocation, dice mechanics, cards, all that sort of stuff. But from a 30,000 feet above in regards to playtesting, the way I did it, which I'm not saying it's the best way, it's just the way I did it, is I would spend a lot of time researching specific mechanics and some of the resources out there. There's some podcasts that are really good, some YouTube channels that are really good. Board Game Geek is really good. And to be more specific on the podcasts, there's Ludology, Board Game Business Podcast, Board Game Design Lab, just to name a few. Tons of resources on Facebook, etc. So if you dig around and look for resources online where there's people that are passionate about it, talking about it, you can research specific game mechanics before you even go to the playtesters, right? Like, do your research, put those ideas down, think about what works for your game, and then go to the playtesting group already prepared with some knowledge of like, hey, I want to try this type of dice system. And then you're not just like shooting in the dark, right? Again, you're respecting their time and you'll have the knowledge from your research to be able to have an informed opinion about why are we doing it this way? And then of course, when it comes time to iterate, you'll have an idea of where do you pivot to. Another extremely useful resource that I found is to reach out to other game designers that you admire and ask them for feedback about like, hey, what do you do? And you'd be surprised how many people would be willing to talk to you. Now, again, since I work in the industry, I've had the fortune to meet many very, very prominent, skilled game designers. And most of them, they're nerds just like us, and they're happy to talk about it. They love talking shop. So if you take the time, like go to a convention or maybe hit someone up via email, like I would avoid hitting them up on social media. That sometimes is a little too personal. People sometimes reach out to me on social media and I'm like, I don't know who this person is. Like, try to reserve that for friends and family to a degree. If you do go via social media, go through like their official page for their business or their game or whatever the case may be. And, be ultra professional, be respectful of their time. And then just ask them like, hey, like, how do you do this? Right? Like, no, I'm thinking about doing this kind of a playtesting format. What do you think? And then look at some other companies that have famously done really successful playtesting on a public format. Pathfinder was like probably, in my opinion, like the largest and most successful one, at least that I can think of. They famously basically built, Pathfinder off of open playtesting for 3.5 D&D. So you can go and look at what other people have done to save yourself some time and avoid making some mistakes. Once you've gone through the process of playtesting for a while, taking diligent notes, the next step is then to interpret the data. So you go back, read your notes, think about, okay, this is what was happening at that time. This was the reaction that the players had. Do I need to change this rule or not? One of the things that we did very frequently was to play something again, right? Sometimes when people play a rule for the first time, there's kind of like some shock and awe. And it's like, if you feel confident about the rule, you're like, you know what, let's give this a week to just chill, kind of like sleep on it, so to speak, come back, try it again. Maybe we'll make some slight tweaks. And what I found a lot of the time was that once players had a little bit more exposure to a rule, they were like, oh, you know what, that doesn't need to change, right? So you have to be judicious in deciding when is their reaction warranting change? When do you think they're overreacting or underreacting? And sometimes you have to just kind of like do it again. And we did that a lot, particularly when we were writing scenarios for the board game. We would, every time the players lost a scenario, we would just play it again with no changes, right? So I wanted to see if it was, as they say in video gaming, a skill issue, or if it really was like, oh, I made that too hard. And a lot of the times what we would find is that the second time players would beat it quite easily. If they lost again, it's like, oh, okay, that was too hard. And I would make some tweaks. To that point, we wanted Bloodthrone to be challenging. We wanted it to feel Dark Souls-ish. Now, obviously, Dark Souls is an action RPG and Bloodthrone is a turn-based tactical RPG. So they're very different in the way that they play. But in regards to feeling like it was a challenge, that was what we wanted to shoot for. For me personally, I like games that are more challenging because it's more rewarding. A good example would be like Kingdom Death Monster. Obviously, thematically, that's different than Bloodthrone. It's very avant-garde. I love the game, but I can see how some people it's not to their taste. But for anyone that's played it, they'll know what I'm talking about. It's a difficult game. We got party wiped the first 2 times we played it, but we thoroughly enjoyed the experience. We wanted Bloodthrone to fall somewhere in between that and closer to Kingdom Death Monster than say Chutes and Ladders, right? So going into the playtesting process, knowing like pretty much what you're shooting for in that regard is important too, so that you can gauge like, is this game too difficult? Is it too easy? Because both of those are obviously bad, depending on what your target market is. And being able to use all that to take the information, log it kind of raw, and then take the time to sit there and just look at it, think about it, and then judiciously decide, where do I need to make changes? Where do I not? Test those changes. It's like, oh, okay, it turns out I made it even more difficult, or I made it way too easy. And then kind of going back through the process. So as you can tell from the way I'm talking about this, we did this very, very painstakingly, right? Now, at the end of the playtesting process for Bloodthrone, we did skip some scenarios because it was like, we had so many iterations, we didn't feel like we needed to. But as we were building the rule set and fine tuning it, we were extremely meticulous is probably the best word. And in my opinion, I think that's the best way to go about doing it. Now, there's different kinds of games where that's not necessary, right? In a PvP game, that's not as necessary in regards to scenarios. Like, you will need to be that meticulous in regards to like balancing things as much as possible. But in a PvE game, like the main box game for Bloodthrone is, although it is a PvE game, the PvE experience, it takes a lot of time to fine tune the way the monsters play. Is the objective too difficult versus where the players are going to be with their character levels, etc. So that you really wanted to get that dialed in. But as you go through iterations and you go through multiple playtest sessions, you start to really get an intuitive feel for it, right? So even to the point when you're writing a scenario, you go like, yeah, I know like in the range of difficulty, this is going to land right about here. That's why I think it's so important to get as many repetitions as you can. Now, if you're out there creating like an RPG, for example, obviously that's not going to be as necessary. In my opinion, you should spend a lot of time balancing the options for the classes or the way you make your characters. Not every RPG is class-based, but one of the things that always annoyed me about D&D and Pathfinder, and I love those games, Rifts as well, is that the disparity in power between the classes was wild. And I know a lot of people play RPGs for the narrative experience, but it's like, it doesn't hurt the game to have more parity in power between the classes, in my opinion. Maybe you're building a game where that's the whole point of the game. Like, one person's a demigod and the other person's like a worm or something. I don't know. There's all kinds of room for creativity. But generally speaking, taking the time to try to balance your rule set so that everyone feels like the role that they're performing in the game is appropriate and fair is only going to make the game better, in my opinion. So in a nutshell, I think that the playtesting process is extremely important. You want to take the time to do it right. And you know, that's from coming from someone who, like, when I love a game, I love a game. Like I said, I get like obsessed about them. So to me, it was incredibly important to week in, week out, get that formal playtest session in, take diligent notes, listen to what everybody had to say, respect their time. And then if I could get side games in, like, oh, hey, man, you want to play a game after work or on the weekend? I would always say yes, right? Unless I just literally couldn't. And by going through that process, not only will you make a better game, but you'll come to understand your game better and you'll understand game mechanics better. Like, putting in that you know, your 10,000 hours, so to speak, is only going to make you better at what you do and the product better. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Making the Game from Concept to Kickstarter. Again, my name is Reece, your host, lead game designer for the game Bloodthrone, which recently had a successful Kickstarter campaign. You can back it now on GameFound. And if you would like to join the conversation, please head over to our Facebook group. It is Bloodthrone Game. Would love to chat with you. If anybody has any questions, please post them in the Facebook group or on the Kickstarter or GameFound pages, and I'll be sure to answer them. I hope you all have a great week, and I will speak to you again next Friday.